You can have your
Main event of the evening.
ready to race to you.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today, we will be discussing Season 7, Episode 20, Allison.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Allison.
We open with Howard coming home in a great mood, one promptly dampened by a letter from the electric company. Hey, you guys! Threatening to turn off their lights unless they pay $4,006.12. Howard calls them to complain.
Now listen, what's the matter with you people?
And when they threaten to turn off his lights, they promptly go out, because Joni turned them off.
Listen, I didn't mean to yell.
The next day, Richie and Fonzie go to the electric company department to get the situation sorted out. They're told to discuss this with Allison Curtis, and Fonzie insists on handling this, because Allison Curtis is a pretty lady.
Allison Curtis is one vision of loveliness.
Unfortunately, Allison is seemingly immune to Fonzie's snap, ignoring him and continuing to work. Fonzie is horrified.
Life as I know it is over.
Until Richie points out that Allison doesn't react when he snaps his fingers either, so she must be deaf.
Life as you know it is not over.
His confidence restored, Fonzie has Richie write a romantic note for Allison.
1 minute, you don't know somebody. The next minute, you do.
But he turns out to not need it, as he is able to successfully ask her on a date using pantomime. Sometime later, Fonzie asks Richie's help in learning sign language from a book,
I learned it from a book.
so he can perform Happy Birthday for Allison's birthday tomorrow. Richie notes that Fonzie seems to be getting serious about Allison, but Fonzie insists there's nothing special about her. Even though she is tender and beautiful and understands Fonzie without hearing a word, they practice the song together.
Happy born day.
Keep going, keep going.
All right. To you.
The next day at Arnold's, everyone is celebrating Allison's birthday, and Fonzie signs the song for her. Afterwards, they kiss, and Allison goes into the powder room. Richie wants to talk to Fonzie.
What is this, a major convo here?
I think this would qualify as a convo, yes.
In my office.
All right.
So they head into his office. A few minutes later, Fonzie storms out because Richie was trying to tell him to not lead Allison on, and not just play lover and leaver. He then asks Allison if she wants to go look at the moon, and she says yes. When Richie tries to intervene, Fonzie asks whoever said he was going to leave her.
Fonzie's in love.
The next day at the Cunningham house, the power is out. As a result, Howard overslept, and everything in the fridge needs to be salvaged before it goes bad.
We got dead beets, dead carrots, dead lima beans.
Back at the electric company, Fonzie and Allison are flirting, and Fonzie tells Allison she's very special. And from now on, she's the only girl he wants to date. Allison isn't interested, though, and calls over a man, her boyfriend. Her boyfriend explains that before Fonzie, Allison thought he was only asking her out because he felt sorry for her.
How could you think that?
Dating Fonzie made her realize that isn't the case, and this morning, she accepted his marriage proposal. He goes outside, and Allison and Fonzie promise to stay friends. She leaves to be with her fiancé, and Fonzie sadly signs, Happy Birthday, while crying. Richie shows up with a check, and Fonzie gives him the bill that Allison found. He angrily claims to have broken up with Allison, and insists on giving Richie a ride home on his bike, even though Richie drove there. Richie signs that Fonzie is okay, and Fonzie corrects his hand placement.
No, Mr. Thumb has to go over here.
Thank you, Peter. That was Allison. It first aired back on February 12th, 1980. This was a weird night of television. Happy Days was followed by a new Good Time Girls, in which Frankie and Edith, played by Adrienne Zemed and Annie Potts, respectively, start to fall in love.
Tuesday on Happy Days. This is finally it.
Life as I know it is over.
The Fonz is head over heels in love. Then the Good Time Girls are making whoopee.
Excuse me, but some of us are still eating.
And on Three's Company,
I only get 1 meal a day where I live.
a younger man is taking Jack's place. Then the magic begins. The 1980 Winter Olympics. Join us and be part of the action.
CBS aired the unsold pilot Getting There, about a husband and wife who run an auto delivery firm but disagree about how to run the business. George S. Irving and Brett Summers played the couple. This was Brett's last filmed acting performance. The cast includes Norman Fell, Catherine Damon, comedian Tim Thomerson, and Western star Dub Taylor, and was directed by John Astin. After this, CBS aired The Exorcist.
Tuesday, February 12th, The Exorcist. One of the greatest box office hits of all time. The Academy Award-winning suspense classic, The Exorcist, coming to network television for the first time in a CBS special movie presentation. Next Tuesday at 8:30, 7:30 Central and Mountain Time.
And NBC aired the 1978 movie The Swarm, starring Michael Caine as a scientist trying to fend off an attack of killer bees that have somehow gotten into America.
The Swarm, a remarkable love story set in the midst of terror. Michael Caine and Catherine Ross. Can love survive the deadliest force mankind ever faced?
You're the one positive thing that's happened to me here.
Henry Fonda, Richard Widmark, Olivia de Havilland, Patty Ducaston, Richard Chamberlain, Lee Grant. Move out! It could really happen. A 3-hour special, Tuesday.
So of those choices, Peter, what are you watching?
Oh my God, I am watching The Swarm. That sounds amazing.
I'm going to be curious about the unsold Brett Summers pilot because I'm a huge Match Game fan. I also am morbidly curious about what a network TV edit of The Exorcist would be like.
If they cut out all the swears, that probably makes Pazuzu a much less scary demon.
Your mama so soft and smell.
Allison was directed by Jerry Paris and was written by the team of Pat Shea and Harriet Weiss. This was Pat and Harriet's only Happy Days script. Together and separately, they wrote on a lot of Norman Lear shows in the 1970s and 80s, including The Jeffersons, All in the Family, Archie Bunker's Place, Gloria, and In the Beginning.
In the beginning, we were not a very lively pair.
After that, they wrote together on The Golden Girls, Valerie, and Marblehead Manor. Pat was married to the very prolific TV director Jack Shea, who was also president of the Directors Guild of America. As for guest stars this week, obviously, our main guest star is Linda Bove as Allison Curtis. Allison is a hearing-impaired actress from New Jersey who founded the National Theater of the Deaf in 1963. Before Happy Days, she had been a regular on the soap opera Search for Tomorrow, but far and away, she is best known for playing the character Linda on Sesame Street.
Linda! Oh, Elmo, you know Linda's deaf. And when someone is deaf, it means they can't hear.
Oh, Linda can't hear Elmo when he's talking.
She was with that show from the mid-1970s to the early 2000s, and she appeared in a number of its spin-off videos, plus the feature film Follow That Bird. Linda's non-Sesame Street credits include the movie Children of a Lesser God and the TV show Weeds. So, Peter, what did you think of Linda Bove as Allison Curtis?
I think that it's great that they got an actual deaf actress to play a deaf character. I wish that they had given her more to do. In this episode, Allison feels kind of like a cipher. Maybe part of that is to make the twist at the end believable, but I think it's also they weren't really sure how to give her stuff to do when she's a character who communicates using a language that probably your average household in 1980 does not understand. For a lot of the scenes, you need Fonzie or her boyfriend who shows up at the end to translate for her, which can make things somewhat awkward.
The episode is named after Allison and theoretically revolves around her, but she registers almost nothing. She is just basically cheerful and vague through this whole episode. She doesn't really do anything. She just kind of stands there and smiles through the whole show and doesn't ever even express any emotions. I don't know if that is due to Linda Bove's acting or maybe the script. They didn't know how to write for her. But, Peter, I have a dark theory about Allison Curtis.
Oh, dear.
I think she and her weaselly little boyfriend, whom we will discuss in a moment, have done this to a half dozen guys.
Oh, my God. Do you think that they're running some kind of elaborate scam? Are they doing it for money or just for, like, sick kicks?
They are doing it for the latter. There was a movie called In the Company of Men in which two men start dating a hearing-impaired woman at the same time just so that they can break up with her simultaneously for their own amusement.
Say we were to find some gal. I mean, this person's just vulnerable as hell, and we both hit her.
Allison is a gender-reversed version of that story.
Oh, it's a version where the disabled woman gets to have the last laugh, which is kind of nice, if still morally reprehensible.
We also have Kenneth Snell as Robert, the man at the front counter at Milwaukee Gas and Electric.
Hey, you heard the computer? I've got to go to lunch.
Ken is an actor with a handful of film and TV credits in the 70s and 80s. This was Ken's first big TV role, but he'd go on to Knots Landing, Cagney and Lacey, and The New Mike Hammer. His movie career started in the early 70s with a small role in the crime drama Judd. His other films include The Marriage of a Young Stockbroker and Charlie Chan and the Curse of the Dragon Queen. Peter, did you have any thoughts on Kenneth Snell as Robert?
I very much related to his desire to just get off the clock as soon as possible and go to lunch.
And last but not least, we have Richard Masur as Doug. Richard is a New York actor who has been a near constant presence in TV shows and films since the mid-1970s. Before this episode, he had already been a regular on Rhoda and Hot L Baltimore and had guest starred on MASH, Mary Tyler Moore, The Waltons, and Hawaii Five-0. After this, he had recurring roles on One Day at a Time, Picket Fences, Orange is the New Black, and Transparent, plus the original miniseries based on Stephen King's It. Richard's movies include The Thing, Risky Business, My Girl 2, Encino Man, Multiplicity, and more. If you want more TV guest star credits, try Mr. Robot, Girls, Elementary, Law & Order SVU, and The Good Wife for starters. Like Henry Winkler, he is a graduate of Yale Drama School. Peter, what did you think of Richard Masur as Doug?
He doesn't even get a name until the credits, and he's just there to exposit about why Allison is breaking up with Fonzie.
It's difficult to say what Richard Masur is most famous for.
It's funny, I can be walking down the street here in New York, for example. Sometimes I have a beard, sometimes I don't, and people aren't really focused on my face, but they'll hear me talk, and that combination I'll feel the head turn.
It seems to be the movie The Thing, but people may remember him from One Day at a Time, or maybe you're into Orange is the New Black, maybe you're a fan of Mr. Robot. Who knows what you know him from?
You may remember me from such movies as Cry Yuma and Here Comes the Coast Guard.
But he's always there. And you sort of remember him, but you sort of don't. And that was the whole key to his career. As for songs this week, we get Happy Birthday to You, performed and signed by Ron Howard and Henry Winkler. I guess the producers decided it was worth it to pay for the song in this episode. I would agree, since I thought the Happy Birthday to You scene was the highlight of Allison.
That was great. During the scene where Fonzie is learning how to sign Happy Birthday for Allison, the sign language book he and Richie are using does not have a sign for the name Allison, so they just go for signing it out using the alphabet. During the scene where Fonzie and everyone is singing it, everyone has to drag out the Happy Birthday to you, dear Allison, so that Fonzie can sign out the name Allison. It's very funny and it's very charming.
Yeah, they actually get two good scenes out of that song. This was money well spent. As for cultural and historical references this week, Marion jokes that her dream boy is Cary Grant.
All day, all night, Cary Grant. That's all I hear from my wife is Cary Grant. What can he do that I can't? Big deal, big star, Cary Grant.
Born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England in 1904, Cary dropped out of school at age 14 and became a stage actor. He came to America to perform on Broadway in 1920. By the early 30s, he was appearing in American movies. He went on to be one of the biggest male stars of the 1940s and 50s and an icon of suave sophistication. In the 1960s, when this episode is supposed to be taking place, Cary drastically slowed down his acting career and then retired altogether from movies after 1966.
I always forget that he's British for some reason.
He's one of those actors who has that accent that's neither quite British nor quite American.
Yeah, the transatlantic accent, which was a constructed accent designed to be vaguely American, vaguely British, just kind of an accent soup.
The agency that Howard is fighting in this episode is called Milwaukee Gas and Electric. Now, I did find a very small handful of articles that mention an entity by this name, but not enough to convince me that it is real. In fact, utilities in Milwaukee are provided by Wisconsin Electric Power and Wisconsin Gas, known collectively as WEC, and founded in 1896. By the way, the Milwaukee Gas and Electric office that we see throughout this episode looks...
It's just a tiny printed sign tucked inside of a closed window with the shades down. This whole situation is very shady.
Which furthers my theory that Allison is a con artist. This doesn't look like a utilities office that I know of.
Which means that there's a possibility that it is for money and not just for pleasure.
Possibly, yeah. Maybe this is all some sort of elaborate scheme.
Which sadly means that Doug must be in on it. Oh, Doug. How could you?
Disappointing, Doug. Throughout this episode, we see a lot of mid-20th century office equipment, including computers the size of refrigerators with big reel-to-reel tapes. In the 1950s, IBM used magnetic tape as a relatively cheap and stable form of data storage, and so those big reels of tape became standard equipment in office comedies and sci-fi films for decades. Surprisingly, tape is still used by businesses and government institutions today for data storage.
I'm taking a class on library and information science right now, and it's kind of interesting how certain forms of data storage just stick around, because you could come up with a whole new way of doing it, but that would take way too much time and effort. And that's how we got MARC coding, which was originally created to make it easier to store information on those little library cards. And now we use the internet, but we still use that form of coding.
We're so invested in one system that it would be too difficult to switch over to another. On the other hand, we also see a lot of punched cards in this episode. That was another common feature of IBM computers of the era. Unlike magnetic tape, these have not been in wide use for decades, apart from some older voting machines. They too were a staple of TV shows and movies from the 1950s and 1960s. At that time, those punch cards were supposed to be futuristic.
A punch card will clear the automation center and buy you the things that you want.
Richie says that a lot of companies are using deaf employees now. This is true. While the deaf initially struggled to gain a foothold in the new industrial age, World War II provided many employment possibilities for the hearing impaired. In particular, the rubber plants of Akron, Ohio became known for hiring deaf employees. The deaf underwent something of a renaissance in the 1960s as sign language, which had been suppressed by schools for decades, was rediscovered.
It was a whole thing. Schools would basically try to push deaf and hard of hearing children into speaking out loud, which, as you may guess, did not work very well.
Richie mentioned Cyrano de Bergerac.
You know, this is a little bit like Cyrano de Bergerac.
What? A fictional French nobleman who is a gifted poet and duelist, but who is cursed with an oversized nose. The character first appeared in a play from 1897 by French dramatist Edmond Rostand, who based it on a real person. Richie actually dressed as Cyrano in Fonselectomy. Fonzie mentions Pinocchio.
Yeah, Pinocchio, I read it.
In the 1883 children's book, The Adventures of Pinocchio by Italian author Carlo Collodi, the title character's nose grows whenever he lies. Fonz also referenced Pinocchio in Smokin' Ain't Cool.
Happiness is not known for its continuity.
The book that Richie consults is Sign Language by Lou Fant.
Sign language?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, let's get down to it.
It first came out in 1977. Lou was an actor, author, and teacher who devoted his life to deaf advocacy. He died in 2001. You can look for him in the movies Pete and Tilly, Airport 1975, The Pom Pom Girls, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, and Tough Turf. Richie says that Fonzie looks just like Bambi.
You look just like Bambi.
The fictional deer Bambi debuted in a 1923 novel by Austrian writer Felix Salten. It was translated into English and became a classic here in America as well. In 1942, it was adapted into a feature film by Walt Disney.
I vaguely remember hearing that the book is super violent and sexual, and the movie toned all that down. I have no idea if that's true or not, but maybe it is, because I know that the original version of The Fox and the Hound was a super downer, so who knows?
Well, maybe now we're going to have to get the gritty, full-tilt Bambi movie that should have been made back in 1942, so...
Who the hell are you?
A Bambi.
Fonz calls Richie Dear Abby. This is the syndicated advice column written by Pauline Phillips under the name Abigail Van Buren. It started in 1956. Today, Pauline's daughter, Jean, continues the column.
And Landers is a boring old biddy.
Ned!
Other observations this week. I'm sorry, but I don't think I will ever get used to Joni's perm. It is especially frizzy in this episode.
It feels like she's slowly anamorphing into Adrienne Barbeau. It feels very anachronistic for the supposed time period.
Yeah, at least Adrienne Barbeau was supposed to be wearing that hairdo in the 70s. It's weird watching this episode a second time, knowing what Allison's endgame is. She's so cheerful and pleasant, you'd never guess that she's setting up Fonzie for a fall. I try to watch the episode a second time, knowing how the story ends, and Allison's behavior doesn't make any sense if you know where it's all headed. She's so emotionally unconnected from this material, she doesn't express any emotions, and I wondered what was going on there. And this is another confusing aspect of the episode. At first, Richie seems to encourage Fonzie's relationship with Allison, but then he discourages that same relationship, and then after their argument at Arnold's, he seems to be happy about it again. I didn't understand Richie's emotional trajectory through this episode at all.
Yeah, it feels like this episode could have gotten a second draft, maybe.
You know, hon, when you rewrite a script, it just gets better and better.
And along with Joni's perm, one of the signs that you're watching a later period episode of Happy Days is that Al wears a plaid vest when he's working. I'm not sure if this was the first plaid vest episode, but it feels like we're now firmly in the plaid vest era of Happy Days.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, please, won't you see my vest? I really like the vest.
I gathered, yeah.
And Howard says that he should have handled the dispute with the electric company himself, which, yeah, it makes no sense that he sends Richie and Fonzie on his behalf.
Fonzie kind of makes sense. He's very good at this sort of thing, especially if women are involved. As for Richie, maybe Howard figured that he'd just end up losing his temper, so he sent Richie as his envoy instead.
I guess I can accept that as an answer. So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
Well, you already brought up Al's plaid vest. I really like the blazer that Richie wore both times to go to Milwaukee Gas and Electric. I thought that was very classy looking. You can tell that he is trying to look presentable to win them over so they don't turn off his family's power. Other than that, yeah, it was a pretty fashion-thin episode.
So did you have any other observations that you wanted to make about Allison?
I guess if you take what Doug says at face value about Allison not really being interested in him because she thought he was only asking her out of pity because she's deaf. That doesn't make any sense why he would propose to her out of the blue. Were they dating or not? And how seriously were they dating that he proposed to her?
And he didn't even go to her birthday, and he just shows up out of nowhere. That's why I say this whole thing is a lie. This is just a story that they tell to guys who happen to wander into Milwaukee Gas and Electric. I don't think there is going to be a marriage, or maybe they've just been married for years.
You gotta do something to keep the marriage exciting, you know?
I guess if this helps, good for you guys. I don't know. So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question. Was this episode any good?
There is actually a lot of good stuff in this episode. I think this is a really good showcase for Henry Winkler. We get to see him be very earnest in wanting to learn sign language. We get to see him threaten Richie when he thinks Richie is saying mean things about the movie Bambi. We get to see him have a tearful breakdown when Allison has just broken his heart. So that part is fun. And I also like the joke of Howard's mini war with Milwaukee Gas and Electric. That was fun, but man, the titular character feels like such a void, and I'm willing to bet that's because they weren't sure how to write a deaf character convincingly and how to let her be able to communicate to the viewing audience on her own terms. The more you pick it apart, the more her whole thing with her boyfriend does not make any sense, as we have demonstrated.
I'm glad you pointed out a few things that were good about this episode, because I was struggling to come up with something nice to say about it. But you're right. Henry Winkler does give an excellent performance in this episode. He's very good from beginning to end. And yes, Howard's war with Milwaukee Gas and Electric is amusing. However, I feel that one of the main problems with this episode was that it was written by an outside team. The problem with an episode like this is that it's a cul-de-sac. You drive in, you go around the loop, you come back out, and nothing has changed. This is a one-episode contained story that doesn't have any effect on the series. I don't know that these writers really even had a good feel for all the characters, especially Richie. I don't think they know how to write Richie. Take an episode like last week's The Hucksters. Now, that was written by Mark Rothman, who wrote for Happy Days for years. And he's able to build on character traits that we know about these characters. He's able to build on situations that we've seen in other seasons. He knows this world inside and out. And an outside writing team, they don't know this world inside and out. This feels like something that was pitched to Happy Days rather than something that Happy Days came up with themselves. Even in that, I don't think they succeeded too well because they didn't really create a character for Allison. So I don't think that I can call Allison a success. I was comparing it to another very special episode from this season, The Mechanic. And at least in The Mechanic, even though the guest character is a jerk for most of it,
At least he's a character.
Yeah, they gave him something to do. They gave him a personality. They gave him actual actions. Allison just kind of just stands there and smiles. It's very difficult to know what to think about her. And then her manipulation of Fonzie through this whole episode seems kind of cruel, as if she doesn't have any empathy for other human beings at all. So this episode was very confusing to me and not satisfying ultimately. There are some good elements in it, as you say, but I cannot recommend it. I'm sorry. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Volfran. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com, and they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, Joni prepares to go on her first date with Chachi. Oh, Joni, no.
This is not an episode that I'm looking forward to, but I will review it anyway. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
We're gonna turn it on. We're gonna bring you the power. We're gonna light up the dark, the night, like the brightest day in a whole new way. We're gonna turn it on. We're gonna bring you the power. It's coming down the line, strong as it can be, through the courtesy of the electric company. The electric company. The electric company.
Allison.